Look, these people all talk for ages, and you must be gagging to ask questions. So let's not bother having discussion up here just yet. Let's just throw the floor open. We'll do rounds of 3, and would you mind telling us your name? And if you're connected with this issue in any way, do say so. So who wants to have a go? We've got roving mics, by the way, so do wait until... got one.
Hi, my name's Tom McInerney. I'm very interested in listening to Rosie and Ben's experience. Struck by, Ben, I think your experience represents the exception, whereas Rosie's probably describes the rule.
Yeah.
Rosie, you said something very interesting about morality and morality of markets. Often people talk about markets and say, well, they're not right, they're not wrong, they're just markets. The Philip Greens of this world would say such a thing. But it seems to me the thing that's not been mentioned by any of you is that the way that this could be fixed or partially fixed, the way you manage markets is by legislation. But successive governments, New Labour, Coalition and Conservative, have singularly failed to do anything about this crisis, which is what it is over 30 years. So I'm interested in your comments about why that is and what governments could do to fix it.
Excellent. OK, who else wants to ask a question or make a comment? Gentleman in glasses.
The devil of the piece seems to be the assured short-hold tenancy. The devil of the...
No, it's OK.
The devil of the piece seems to be the assured short-hold tenancy, which we haven't had much of a mention of, except for Rosie.
It was implicit, I think.
Yes, on the other two people have been exceedingly lucky to avoid them. I'm not quite sure how you write a 10-year lease. And
OK.
Many people want to do it, but Tim was sort of managing to get round it by doing very short-term things, and I suspect he had a reasonable income and a job behind it. But the problem is for people who haven't got reasonable incomes and reasonable jobs on steady jobs. And
2 comments about law, really, or regulation. Who else wants to jump in? I'm looking for one more. Lady down the front. Excellent. Well done.
It's your keep.
Yeah, I'd like to ask about the law and regulation of the sizes as well. When you're mentioning about the small cubicles and small housing, and as far as I'm aware, there's restrictions on the sizes of how much space a person should have and the legal rights to it, and also bathrooms, toilets, and requirements for that as well. How do you address that? Again, it goes into the law section.
OK, all right. Well, look, all 3 of those questions were about regulations and law, and I think... Tim, we'll give you a bit of a breather. We'll start with Rosie. Rosie, if you were to come up with, say, 3 things, 3 laws or 3 rules that would make the rental market better, what would they be?
I'd say minimum 5-year tenancies. The AST must last 5 years. That doesn't mean you have to stay for 5 years. That means you can leave. As a tenant, you can leave. Just give a month's notice. But you have the right to stay for 5 years.
So the assured short-hold tenancy, you can currently break it after 6 months. Is that right?
Yeah, well, it only lasts 6 months, legal minimum. If you're lucky, you get 12. Some people do get 12. There's a reason why... some landlords do actually want to offer longer tenancies, but their mortgage providers don't let them, so that's another thing that needs to be changed. But yeah,
you want to extend it out to 5 years?
Yeah, so 5 years just gives you the right to stay for that long, crucially the right to complain, and the right to know what the rent increases are going to be, how much rent you're going to be paying for 5 years, which makes you, then you can plan ahead, you can raise a family, So that would be the first thing. Second thing, we need some form of rent control. It's better to talk about rent controls rather than rent control, because everyone thinks, rent control is some mad communist plot, and, actually it's quite normal in most of Europe. Doesn't work so well in New York, I agree, but does work pretty well in Germany, Sweden, lots of Europe, because, that would still allow landlords to make a profit. Just a bit less profit. Third thing is we need properly enforceable standards. So we've got these things called licensing schemes at the moment where councils can make private landlords get a licence, which in theory is meant to make them meet certain standards, and they can have the licence taken away if they don't meet those standards. In practice, it's not really working because, as I said, councils just don't have the money to handle it properly. So we would have a properly funded, enforceable standards system, which would include, a publicly accessible register of landlords for a start.
Right, OK. Ben, I thought you were making a plea for a different kind of owner rather than necessarily just a rule. So would you like to talk a bit about that?
I think that the trouble with pure legislation is that we've got ourselves, as you rightly pointed out, into a situation which has developed over a 20 to 30 year period into a crisis. I personally believe with the full support of all of those governments, because I think there's a feeling in this country, probably uniquely, I don't have a huge experience of it, that the only way to succeed economically is to own your home. And of course, this is a deeply ingrained generational issue now, and my own parents bought their first house in the early 60s when they got married, and it cost them, I think their first home cost them less than £1,000, and their second home cost them £1,200. And the largest mortgage that my father has ever owned in his life was £20,000. And of course now they're sitting on a nice-ish house in the Isle of Wight, probably worth £350,000 or £400,000 or something like that. So to lock in that generational wealth in 1 or 2 generations has skewed the whole way that we think about things. I think that the chickens will come home to roost in that regard when, as is already happening through legislation, old age care is being paid through the value in the house. It's the other flip side of it is, of course, that so many of my friends who have got onto the housing ladder are at absolute full stretch, as far as I can see, living in a slightly cloud cuckoo land with the low mortgage rates right now. But very few of them are saving into a long-term pension of any form. So they'll have a house when they stop working, but not necessarily money to eat. So there are lots of issues bubbling around, and I think it is ignorance on the part of the government. It's a sort of very short-term view. Given the amount of invested sort of interest that we have in the game, I think it would be very hard to legislate all of a sudden to say every lease must be 5 years long. It would cause a huge disruption in the mortgage market and the housing market. I completely support the long-term aspiration, but I think that would have to be a piece of law which is passed that in 10 years' time or in 15 years' time we would have this as a target, because I think it would have to be a very slow shift back into longer leases. I think that the private landlords, the buy-to-let mortgage people who are a powerful constituent in any election would, maybe they're not, I don't know, I feel that they...
I mean, just to give you a sense of how out of kilter the rights of tenants versus landlords is, I saw something that's just been launched, actually a tech startup that's just been launched in London. Now, it's very rare that you get startups launched in London as opposed to the west coast of America. But this one is designed for landlords in Britain, and so it's been trialled in Britain. And it's a piece of software which, if you get your tenant to sign up to a contract, the landlord can then get this agency to go through all of their social media postings and build a picture of what kind of tenant they are before you rent out the place to them. So if the tenant, Tim had a thing up about Facebook, so if the tenant writes about having gone to an HIV clinic, or having been made jobless, or just puts up some rather dodgy photos of themselves, the landlady can say, no, I don't want any part of you. And that is a system in which the landlady has huge amounts of power and the tenant has very little. And obviously not all landlords are going to be that intrusive, but it's the place in which, Britain's a place in the market in which those ideas can get tested out. Tim, can I come to you? I think I've saved the last comment for you. The thing about size and property guardianship. Size does matter, doesn't it?
So London currently has a minimum, the GLA have set a minimum house design guide. I believe it is a studio is 400 square foot and a one bed is 500 square foot on a new build property. I'm completely against that. I feel if we want to start making London truly affordable, the only way to do that is to start building smaller units. I'm very happy living in a small unit. It's not a problem for me. And I accept that the reason they're doing that is to take into context families. And I think when you have a family, space suddenly becomes a much bigger criteria for you. But when we're getting these developments which are saying, okay, you've got to have X amount of 1 beds, X amount of 2 beds, X amount of 3 beds, all of a certain spatial size, you're alienating a lot of that affordable option. And if you speak to developers, they want to build smaller units. They realise the demand, housing-wise, is for that affordable sector. It's not this, I think we get a lot of negativity about what's going on in Nine Elms, where a lot of these schemes are being sold off seas. And I agree, it's not right. It's a bit of a kick in the teeth for people going for on the affordable side. But that's a very small issue compared to small criteria like that. There's a company called Pocket Living, which very interesting. What they do is that they get away building below the minimum space standards, and in doing so, they say to the local authorities, we're going to build 20% less from what you set, but then we're going to set it at 20% below market rent. And it's a really interesting model because it's profitable, but it's also serving a purpose for the wider generation of what Londoners want.
My flat, which I lived in for 8-9 years in Great Ormond Street, was 32 square metres. It was tiny. It was a great flat. It was fantastic. It was well designed. It was built in 1720 or something, but it was well designed flat. And it was, I think size is a bit of a false issue as well. I'm involved in my architectural work and development, and it's a key part of affordability.
Let's take some more questions and comments. I feel sort of duty bound really to get some of the landlords, landladies who declared themselves at the start to pitch in a bit, because you've had 3 renters' perspectives. I'd be very interested to hear what any of the landlords, landladies, what their take on things would be. Do anyone want to pitch in? I do remember who put their hands up, so I will call them. Let's take the gentleman in the white shirt.
Well, I was offering as a landlord.
You're sorry?
I was offering as a landlord.
Excellent. Then you are my man.
Hi there. Andrew Kafkaris. I'm a chartered surveyor, private landlord, private tenant as well as an advisor to investment institutions looking to invest in the private rented sector. Very interested in this evening's discussion. Firstly, as a landlord, I've owned various different properties at different price points. Very interested in what Rosie had to say in her terrible experiences. I've owned houses in South London where the average rent per room has been maybe £400 per month, and that's quite in the last 2 years. Our view, regardless of the rental level, if something breaks, you have a responsibility as a landlord to fix it. We respond to problems, whether it's drainage, plumbing, heating, same day in the same way as I would with flats that I've owned in Westminster, where people might be paying £400 a week. So it is a very wide church being a private landlord, and I think there are good landlords out there. I think there's been a lot of discussion already about the access to credit, and I think that has been a big issue and a problem for the sector. It has been very easy to get buy-to-let mortgages for the last 10 or 15 years, and therefore there are very low barriers for entry into the sector, and perhaps that's where you've encountered problems with landlords who are really only in it for the cash. That's just a quick view of my personal approach to being a landlord. Moving across to my professional angle on the market, we're a firm of chartered surveyors advising UK pension funds, insurance companies, and also international investors. There is currently, I would suggest, tens of billions of pounds of institutional money looking to invest in the private rented sector in the UK. We're looking in London, both in centrally all the way out to Zone 6. We're looking in most of the UK's major cities, as well as other selected towns and cities across the country. The appetite for the pension funds is as long-term an investment.
Yeah.
They're not looking for a quick profit. They understand all of the issues, and they want to be the type of landlords that Ben has described. And I would point out that the commonality of Ben's experiences, both in town and in Dorset, has been that has been fortunate enough to rent from a landed estate who generally takes a long-term view. And interestingly, those 10-year leases that he's been talking about and making tenants improvements were commonplace 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago. It's been lost in this obsession, which I think one of the panellists used earlier, for home ownership in the UK. And perhaps that it's now going to be reversed as more institutional money comes in, offering security of tenure, long leases, and good quality management.
Okay, thank you for that. Does anyone else? I think we'll take one more and then we'll come back up here. Yes, the lady over there. Yeah, you go for it. But wait until the mic comes to you.
My name is Catherine, and I'm doing a project for a housing advice charity, and I'm very interested in the work that Rosie does, and I'm very interested to hear what the other panel experiences, the experience they've had. But you've got tens of billions of pounds waiting to invest in the private rented sector. What are you waiting for?
Yeah, well, it's just there. Wait no longer.
The biggest barrier to entry is finding the land.
Yeah.
Over the last 3 or 4 years, the main problem is that you're competing with the house builders. And because of this, what we regard as a disconnect between what people are earning and what investors and people are prepared to pay for housing, it is making those that want to buy land and develop for rental uncompetitive on land price compared to house builders. However, we think that market is changing, certainly in London, rapidly. There are lots of schemes that are struggling to sell, and therefore that's opening up opportunities for these long-term investors.
Thank you.
Okay. I think, well, we're only a couple of minutes from finishing, so let's just come up to the three of you. You heard there quite a good defence of landlords and, you know, the way they think, and actually, you know, some kind of sense that actually perhaps Rosie's been unlucky in the landlords you've had. What do you want to say to that?
I think, yes, I mean, there are obviously decent landlords out there. I just haven't had any of them myself.
Have you out of all, 18 years of being a tenant?
Yeah.
In all that time, how many decent landlords, how many of those years were good years as being a tenant?
Probably 3 or 4. I reckon, yeah, probably 2 or 3 of the landlords, and so maybe 3 or 4 of the years were okay, you know, actually quite sort of decent people. Yeah, so not that many. but I do think there's. So that's what I wanted to sort of explore in the book a bit was, you know, you can obey the law and you can meet all these obligations, and we've still got a problem of wealth transfer from the bottom to the top, and that's a much bigger issue. But yeah, I do agree that there are decent landlords out there, and probably the institutional model is the way to go. Whether it's easy to get there or not, I don't know. But that's what they have in Germany, and it seems to work quite well, because then companies are at least accountable and visible, and you know who your landlord is, and all the other tenants in your block also have the same landlord, so you can act collectively.
Okay, let's just end with one kind of final thought from each of you, and it's going to be in response to this one question. Sadiq Khan, new Mayor of London, is going to, within weeks, announce a big plan to build loads and loads of affordable housing, as much as he can possibly build on land from TfL and NHS trusts. Good idea or bad idea? Rosie, you first.
Brilliant idea, but it won't solve everything.
Okay, Ben?
I don't know anything about it, really. So I
down in Dorset, you don't need to worry about such things.
Well, even in London, I don't know enough about it. It sounds like a headline-grabbing idea. I think everything helps, but it may be more complicated than a numbers game.
Tim.
I think the issue with this social housing is it's become such a politically charged term that people are bandishing it out left, right and centre in terms of, you know, what we actually need. The reality is just a cog of 4 other sort of key components. One is getting a private rented sector institutionally backed, which can bring up standards to the levels they should be. The other is looking at, well, look, are we moving away from a generation of home ownership? I mean, David Cameron still seems pretty insistent that my generation being aspired to buying homes. So we're having a load of mixed messaging, and it's all getting blurred over. And the reality is none of them have a clue. And what I would like to see happen is we start employing key personnel from the property industry, experts, whether that's planning, whether that's developing, pay them big salaries, get them on board, and let's get people in who actually know what they're talking about, rather than just trying to grab some headlines in the newspapers.
Okay. Look, we really could have gone on for a lot longer, but I think I've really enjoyed listening to these 3 contributions. So will you please thank Tim, Ben and Rosie? And I think I was charged with one housekeeping point, which I've remembered. So apparently on the back of your tickets is a feedback form. Would you please fill it in and hand it in? Thank you.